A few weeks ago, a Congressional Select Committee concluded that China is using secrets pilfered from U.S. government labs to develop a new generation of nuclear weapons. But as we reported last year, it's not just a question of what the Chinese may have stolen, but what the United States government gave them. In the past 6 years, the Clinton administration has gone to unprecedented lengths to make it easy for the Chinese to get their hands on vital technology that's probably helped them upgrade their military capability across the board. Back in 1992, during his first presidential campaign, then Governor Bill Clinton criticized the Bush administration for not being tough enough on China.
In China, the president continues to coddle aging rulers with undisguised contempt for democracy, for human rights, and for the need to control the spread of dangerous weapons technologies.
But by the time President Clinton met last year with Chinese President Jiang Zemin, the Clinton administration had done far more to help China acquire technology that will enhance its military capability than the Bush administration ever did. According to a recent CIA report, China now has more than a dozen missiles equipped with nuclear warheads pointed at the United States. Yet American companies have sold the Chinese all sorts of technology that can be used to make those missiles much more accurate.
China is the one country in the world that has the prospect of becoming a rival superpower to the United States. And it is not in our interest to build up China's military capability.
No one's been more vocal on this subject than Gary Milholland, a University of Wisconsin professor and a leading expert on the sale of arms technology. He says U.S. companies have sold the Chinese nearly 80 supercomputers since the Clinton administration eased export restrictions on them 2 years ago. They're the large computers that can process vast amounts of information at very high speeds and solve some of the most complicated mathematical and engineering problems.
The Chinese now want to upgrade their nuclear weapon designs, make them smaller and lighter, so they can fit on longer-range missiles capable of hitting U.S. cities. They also want to be able to simulate the flight of a ballistic missile to save time and money in design and testing.
This makes it easier to do that.
It saves man-years of time, it saves millions of dollars of expense, and it gets you there faster if you have a supercomputer.
Milholland and others are concerned because at least one of the supercomputers was sold directly to the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which does nuclear weapons research for the Chinese government. The computer came from Silicon Graphics, a company then run by Edward McCracken, who was a key organizer of support for Bill Clinton in Silicon Valley. What you may find surprising is that the Undersecretary of Commerce responsible for export policy doesn't deny that the Chinese may be using American high technology to upgrade their nuclear weapons.
It's not our policy to sell them computers for that purpose. But you have to ask the other question, is it in our power to stop them from acquiring that computer capability through other means? And my response is, it is not possible for us. That's a sad fact.
William Reinsch says the sad fact is the Chinese could buy lots of smaller computers and string them together to make their own supercomputers. And if American companies don't sell to them, sooner or later other countries will.
You tell me that our computer companies can't market in China, and I will tell you that in 9 months you will have Asian competitors marketing comparable products in China.
But it's not just missile technology and computers. U.S. companies have also sold the Chinese special materials that help make planes like the stealth fighter invisible to radar. And just last month, major U.S. defense contractors were showing off their wares at a defense electronics show in Beijing. It was all civilian use equipment, they said, but most of it had military applications as well. One American firm displayed computer software that defense analysts told us could be used in targeting systems for low-flying cruise missiles. But before any sensitive technology can be sold and shipped to China, an export license has to be obtained here at the Commerce Department, which along with the Pentagon and the State Department is supposed to make sure that national security isn't jeopardized. But the system is far from perfect and not immune to political influence. And it certainly didn't stop the Chinese from buying virtually an entire production line of this former defense factory in Columbus, Ohio, that manufactured some of the most advanced weapons in the U.S. arsenal. Plant 85, as the Defense Department called it, was built for the U.S. Navy in 1941 to make fighter planes for World War II and later Korea. Until a few years ago, it was used to turn out components for the B-1 bomber, the MX missile, and the Titan missile.
It was booming. There was people everywhere, machines everywhere. It was a booming place.
As you can see, it's now empty. Back in 1992, when Fred Lasson was a machinist and head of the local union, McDonnell Douglas announced it was closing the plant, laying off more than 1,000 skilled workers and selling off the precision machine tools used to cut and bend huge pieces of specialized materials into complex shapes and smooth surfaces like the wings of a bomber or the skin of a missile. Lasson and his fellow workers put together a $10 million financial package to buy the equipment. While they were waiting for an answer, delegations from China began touring the plant.
They started photographing the actual machining of some of the C-17 parts, Titan missile parts.
Was that unusual that foreign nationals were allowed in the plant to take pictures?
That was unheard of. That was completely unheard of.
Why?
The security of the plant, they just don't allow that.
A few months later, it was a done deal. McDonnell Douglas agreed to sell the equipment for $5 million to the China National Aerotechnology Import and Export Corporation, a Chinese government entity which maintains offices in California. Why would the Chinese be interested in this equipment? What would they use it for?
Probably the same thing we used it for. Missiles, fighter aircraft, bombers.
Why was McDonnell Douglas so eager to sell a defense production line to China when the company could have sold it for more money to their own employees? And why did the Commerce Department approve it? Well, because as it turns out, it was part of a much bigger deal, a $1 billion deal, to jointly manufacture commercial airliners in China. And the late Commerce Secretary Ron Brown was very much involved in those negotiations. This letter indicates how important those machine tools from Columbus were to the Chinese. They warned McDonnell Douglas if they didn't get the equipment, it would have a big influence on the $1 billion airliner deal. Gary Milholland says the deal was about to collapse.
And rather than give up the bucks from the airline deal, McDonnell Douglas just said yes.
You make it sound like almost like blackmail.
It was blackmail. The Chinese were telling McDonnell Douglas, look, if you want to make a big airline package deal with us, we want a sweetener. We want some sensitive machine tools that you would not otherwise sell us as part of the deal. And we want you to close your eyes to where these machine tools are going, and we want the administration to close its eyes.
That's what happened, you
And
think?
that's what happened.
Undersecretary of Commerce William Reinsch told us that the machines weren't that critical.
The machine tools in question, most of them were 20 years old, and I question in passing how sophisticated and state-of-the-art they actually were.
Sophisticated enough to build MX and Titan missiles.
Sure, but, you know, in my business, 20 years old is not state-of-the-art.
But for some people at the Pentagon, it was. Dr. Peter Leitner is a defense analyst who was assigned to review the McDonnell Douglas proposal to see if it threatened national security. Did you oppose this deal?
I did, and I definitely opposed it. And it was based upon a bunch of considerations, including what the Chinese might use it for. And one of the principal things was the possibility of diversion, of diverting these machine tools to military production.
How likely did you think it was that they might be diverted?
Very likely.
Very likely, because Dr. Leitner and other Pentagon officials were pretty sure the machines were not going to go where the Chinese said they were going, a factory near Beijing, which was supposed to make parts for passenger jets.
Turned out the facility didn't exist.
Didn't exist?
It didn't exist at the time the machines were sold.
Was it on the drawing board?
It was just alleged by the Chinese that's what they were going to do.
But when Leitner recommended to his bosses at the Pentagon that the deal not be approved, he was told to change his recommendation.
I said that I'm not willing to do that, I'm not able to do that, and I'm not going to do that. He said, well, fine, somebody else will do this then.
And did they say why?
Because the decision's been made to approve it.
By whom, do you know?
I was told it was made at high levels within the government, within the Pentagon and within the rest of the government. Decision was made to approve this case. And that was that.
And just as Leitner predicted, the Chinese illegally diverted some of the machines to a facility called the Nanchang Aircraft Manufacturing Company. We're told this is a facility that manufactures silkworm missiles.
It makes a lot of things. It makes bicycles.
You don't honestly believe that they were using this equipment to make bicycles?
No, I don't.
Undersecretary Reinsch told us that if the department had known the precision machine tools were headed for a missile factory, the export license would not have been approved.
I mean, you're in an easy position. You can look at what happened in 1995 and 96 and 97 and say, gee, you should have turned that one down. Well, I think if we'd known what we know now at the time, we probably would have.
But sources at the Pentagon swear the Commerce Department did know that the equipment was going to end up at Nanchang or someplace like it, and had copies of these documents showing that the Chinese government was shopping the precision machine tools around to various defense installations. In the end, McDonnell Douglas, as required by the export license, notified the U.S. government, which ultimately convinced the Chinese to move the machines out of the missile factory and to put them in storage, where most of them are still sitting in crates.
To me, this is a case of our system working. We attached a condition to the license designed to pick this problem up. It picked the problem up. The company reported the problem. We did something about it. We recovered the machines. The national security was not hurt, and now we're investigating to figure out who the bad guys were.
I can understand why you say it's a success story, but
it would have been a bigger success if it hadn't happened at all, sure.
And there's still some debate over just how hard the Commerce Department tried to find out who the bad guys really were. It took them 6 months to open an investigation, and Mark Reardon, the Commerce Department case agent assigned to investigate, says the higher-ups in Washington didn't seem anxious to get to the bottom of things.
Did you feel like you were getting support from the department?
No, not at all.
Reardon, who is now an investigator with the Food and Drug Administration, says he was told who to interview and what questions he could and couldn't ask.
Does that ever happen before?
Not in my career.
What'd you make of it?
That somebody didn't really want the truth coming out.
The Commerce Department says that's just not true. What is true is that the machines are still in China. There are no plans to send them back, and no way to ensure that they won't someday be used to make Chinese missiles. In fact, McDonnell Douglas is now trying to get restrictions lifted on some of the machines so the Chinese can move them elsewhere. Over and above that, there's the concern that China could pass the benefits of this and other American technology to someone else.
China has the worst proliferation record of any country in the world. The Chinese gave Pakistan the design for a nuclear warhead and gave the material to fuel it. And now the Chinese are supplying Iran, both missile and nuclear programs.
There is no question that we are not happy with their proliferation policies. We've made that clear to them at every level, from the president on down. The fact is, in export controls, the only way to have zero risk is to export nothing. And we think that would be the wrong policy.
Since this story was broadcast a year ago, the sale of supercomputers to the Chinese has accelerated. According to the report by that congressional committee looking into technology transfers to China, as of last September, U.S. companies had shipped more than 500 of the high-performance machines to the Chinese. And by the way, the congressional committee cited our story in its report. It said it investigated allegations that the government didn't want to get to the bottom of the McDonnell Douglas case. What did the committee conclude? For the moment, the Justice Department has asked the committee to keep its findings secret. As for McDonnell Douglas, which is now owned by Boeing, a spokesman for the company says it did nothing wrong.